talking about the nature of God. And it's tough stuff. Nothing we've looked at has been easy or, that's fun and that's simple, or I don't have to think about answering that question. It's heavy. And there are very varying beliefs concerning this stuff. There are people who have physically fought each other because of these things. You had people who loved God who would curse each other out because of differing opinions on this stuff. So it's been heavy, but it's stuff that at the very least we need to consider. And just to be honest, there's a ton more stuff that we could go into a whole lot more depth in, just like I said. I don't want this to become a class in which we are treating things the way they would at a seminary, because you just can't. It's too easy to get bogged down in the mud and never get anywhere. And there is a degree to which some things are very practical in Christianity, and some things are less practical. Now, I do believe that all theology is practical when it's all said and done, because Christianity is a relationship, and a relationship involves knowing both parties knowing each other. And God doesn't have to work to understand us, but we sure have to work to understand Him. And so I think that I was reading C.S. Lewis the other day, and he was saying that he was teaching on theology and to a group of military veterans. And one man stood up and said, I don't buy any of this stuff for a second, because I was fighting the Germans in the trenches, and I had an experience with God, a real experience with God. And I come back to all this these little formulas you've made, these petty formulas, and this is nothing. I looked at you, have your hand raised.
Sorry.
You have a question? No, it's good. Your hand is hurt. These petty formulas, and this is nothing like the reality of God. And Lewis said, I agreed with the guy to a degree, because anyone who's gone off and experienced the Atlantic Ocean comes back and looks at a map and goes, well, this is a colored piece of paper, not really more. But at the same time, when you look at what a map is, it comes from the culmination of hundreds of thousands of experiences of the Atlantic Ocean. People have figured it out. And really, the map is a necessity to be able to move forward and find your way around the Atlantic Ocean. So yes, theology is not a matter of the experiential. However, I believe it's a necessity when you're moving forward in relationship with God. And it's God Himself who said, let no one brag about this or that or whatever else, but let him boast in the fact that he understands me. And that's something we should seek. So anyway, we aren't moving out of the nature of God, but we're moving into one major area of specialization when you're talking about the nature of God in the coming weeks. And we're going to be talking about sin, which has serious ramifications about who God is and how He works and what He... What's that?
Is that called the nature of sin? Is that
the nature of sin is going to be the subset we're moving into. But major ramifications about who God is and what He cares about and how He works. And it also has even more major ramifications for how we are to live. Hi guys. We're just doing some introductory stuff for how we are to live and the things we are to focus on and the things that we believe about what it means to live out the Christian life. So, that said, we have spent probably 2 months-ish on looking at this nature of God stuff, who God is, and varying, even covering the various beliefs and viewpoints, worldviews about who God is and His nature, and foreknowledge, and everything in between. But I did want to at least open up a bit of time for questions, or ideas, or things that struck you wanted to mention or get clarification on before we move into a next major subject. Now, I will say this. Some of you will ask a question in which there's no way to answer it without spending an hour. That's, unfortunately, how it is. Now, some of the questions will be easily answered very quickly. Some of them just won't be. So, because we do have a limited amount of time here, there's a chance that one of you will ask a question and I'll say, I can give you a little tiny answer, but it's not going to be enough, and there's no way we can cover the whole thing. But I can do my best. So we'll have an open question and answer and discussion time for at least half of this class, and then we'll start looking and moving towards a definition of sin. in the Christian context. So, questions, thoughts?
Not all at once. Oh no, people.
Now we can talk about time briefly, and it will be. I can look at exactly the stuff that I looked at in my answer to you on Facebook, if you wanted to, with added commentary.
We could do that.
Okay. Tammy asked a question on the Facebook page, because we have a Facebook Foundations page. If you're on Facebook, search for Nate Austin Evans, that's me, and I will add you to the page. But it's so I can give updates and so we can have discussion and so on and so forth. It's been really valuable. And Tammy said this, "Hi Nate, studying prophecy has started me thinking about the idea that God exists outside of time. This is something I've always believed is a way of understanding how God could know what happens in the end, i.e. prophecy and foreknowledge and so on and so forth. But now I'm questioning this belief. This is further complicated in my mind by God seemingly stopping time when Joshua prayed for more time to win the battle. You guys are familiar with that story. The sun stood still. Yeah. And when God seemingly reversed time to show Hezekiah he had heard his prayers and would give him more time to live, i.e. the shadow story. Do you have any resources to recommend or any thoughts on how this relates to prophecy? I hope my question makes sense. Smiley face. I feel like I'm on a radio show and reading mail from the... Good. Now, God's relationship to time is a fun one. I'll just write the word time up here, so we don't forget what we're talking about. It's a fun one, and it's a really confused one. Because just like prophecy, it has been hyper-Hollywoodized, time has as well. Because when you think of time in relation to an action movie, well, either you are restricted by time, 60 seconds to live, or 24 hours to save the nation, or whatever. Or you're talking about time travel, right? I found a machine that'll take me 1,000 years in the past, or a day in the past, or whatever. And then there's some fighting they do, and maybe they change the past and change reality because they can go back in time. And that comes from this idea of time. So here's like back then, and over here is right now, and over here is the future. And this is like a thing, like a place, okay? And so let's say we're here in the present right now, and I'm going to take this ship and I'm going to go back to right here. And now I'm over here. And there's all kinds of weird time paradoxes like, okay, this continues to exist and go on without me, and there's multiple versions of me from every millisecond in the past, and I can travel back to there, and I'm there with the other me. And anyway, it's just confusing stuff when you look at Hollywood's view. Now, when you're talking about time, and this is where I have to say, we could spend hours on this, or we can spend 30 seconds on this. The 30-second version is time as a concept is, simply speaking, it's a unit of measurement. It's a unit of measurement. So when you talk about the idea of numbers are technically, this is like a man-made unit of measurement. Idea of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, it is a way of calling a reality, you know what I mean? But numbers is just the idea of numbers, or the idea of a foot or an inch or a gallon or whatever. It's a unit of measurement to just be able to gauge something, to keep track of something. So it's a unit of measurement, and more specifically, and this is what I told Tammy, it is a way of measuring duration in terms of sequence. Duration of events and the intervals between them is the strict definition of the term. So, let's say you are talking about how Nate was snapping. And you're like, okay, Nate was snapping 1 day ago. So that other people can understand, okay, I now understand the unit of measurement that is a day, and that's when it happened. And then Nate snapped for 1 minute straight. It's a way of measuring the event, that the duration of this event was 1 minute. And then it's a way of measuring the interval between now and when the event happened, or between events in general. 1 day of time has passed since Nate snapped his fingers. You get the idea? Mm-hmm. Now this is weird. It's counter what Hollywood has told us, but it's just a way of measuring. It's a way that we can understand the universe. Now again, any unit of measurement that is accurate is based on a reality that's already there. Time can exist as a unit of measurement because our reality works in sequences. It's all about sequences. So I did this, and then I walked here, and then I said something, and then I walked back here. That's a sequence of 4 events. Make sense? So one thing happened here, and the next thing happened here, and the next thing happened, and then the next thing happened. It's a sequence, and time is a way of measuring that sequence. But time exists because we're progressing forward in reality. And we have no concept of being able to measure this because if there was no sequence in reality, it would just be chaos. Just chaos. And we can't even fathom it because it's so counter what reality is. I mean, you know what I mean? If you try to think about what it means for there to be no sequence, you can't. Because nothing exists like that. There's nothing in reality that works not in relation to sequence. So time is a way of measuring sequence. And so when we say things like inside or outside of time, if you say God is inside of time or God is outside of time, specifically if you say God is outside of time, what you say is God does not experience sequence. Make sense? God doesn't experience sequence, is what you mean when you say God does not, he's outside of time. Time in terms of a place, it's not a place. It's either he experiences sequence or he doesn't. If he doesn't experience sequence, then he can't be gauged in this unit of measurement we call time. By any stretch of the term. That's what we mean. Now the question is, does he or does he not experience sequence? Because when you say time, this is it's an abstract concept of measurement. It is. So does God experience sequence or not? And here's the thing. If you were to throw away the Bible, we have no way of we have no way of knowing. This is no way. Aside from our personal experiences, but how can we trust our own head? You know what I mean? But just talk with me here. Based on the picture of God that the Bible gives us, from at least how we can understand the Bible on the surface, how you can understand the Bible in the surface, does God experience sequence?
Yes.
Seems that way. The biggest evidence of this is the concept of emotion. Okay? Now, emotion, by definition, is sequential. Emotion cannot work without sequence. I'll show you how. So, I'm over here. I'm just doing whatever. I'm not mad or angry, or I'm not really experiencing any major emotion right now. Nothing has happened. Now, let's say one of you stood up and threw a book at my face.
That was me.
Tony did it. Stood up and threw a book at my face. My initial reaction, I'd probably be shocked, but then I'd probably get angry. Why did you throw a book at my face? And here's what happened. Here's me, not angry. And then Tony threw a book at my face. And in reaction to this event, I got angry. Okay? Emotion always happens as a result of something else. It's a reaction from something that has just happened. Now, what this means is, I'm angry here. If I'm angry right now, there had to be a time in which I was not angry. If my state of anger is right, and I'm angry now, then I wasn't angry at least sometime before. Which means there was something that happened between when I was not angry and between when I got angry to make me angry. And there was Tony's action. He threw a book at my face. Wasn't angry, book in face, got angry. Now this is a sequence. Mate, it's a basic sequence. Point A, point B, point C. Point C would never have happened before point A or at the same time as point A. It is a sequence, 1, 2, 3. Now, based on what we can see of the Bible, and again, the only way we can deal with this is what we can read from a surface level. Now, not just on the surface level, but what you can read and the best to your ability to understand. Does God experience emotion? At the very least, the Bible tells us he does.
Yes.
So once again, for me, in my understanding of God, my attempts to understand him, the best I can do is take what the Bible tells me.
Yes.
What the Bible tells me is that God saw what happened on the earth in the flood, and he was grieved to his heart. Being grieved is an emotion. It's a state. If he was grieved at that point, there had to be a time that he was not grieved prior.
Yes.
And there had to be something that caused the grief. Now, he wasn't grieved. Mankind did really terrible things on earth, and then he was grieved. That is a sequence. Now, once again, either the Bible is correct in what it appears to be saying on the surface level, because taking it at face value, very clearly, that's a sequence and those are emotions. Or there's a deeper meaning that we can never understand. One or the other. For me, and I'll give you my honest opinion, I'm going to take what the Bible appears to be telling me always, rather than saying, well, I don't care what it appears to be telling me. I believe there's some deeper meaning that we'll never be able to understand. Based on my experiences with God and how I read the Bible, that's not how God tends to work. I'm willing to be wrong. But if I am wrong, there was no way I could have known.
No.
Because the Bible gave me no clues.
Yeah.
If the clue is that verse in Isaiah, you need to find a better clue. Because the my ways are higher than your ways is not referring to on a nature level, it's referring to a level of character, i.e.
Yes.
goodness versus wickedness.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I think of the scripture where he goes to the cross and he said, "It's not my time yet." And you know, I mean, there's many references. You know, Mary, the mom makes the wine, and you know, there's other instances where he says, "Can't you pray for me?" You know, it's not my time yet. So, time meant something. I mean, there was a plan.
yeah, once again, at the very least, the picture the Bible gives us of God's interactions with man gives us a picture of sequence,
Yes.
at the very least.
Yes.
Now, once again, you can take that, or you can say there's a deeper meaning that we'll never understand. But it's one or the other. It just
Well, you
is.
definitely have to have some emotion. I think.
Well, that's the thing, because some people would very strongly disagree with you. Now, candidly, I would agree.
Yeah.
You know what is confusing for me is, you know, without getting into the emotional part of it, you can see a sequence just in creation, that it was done in a sequence. So we talk about time as sequences, that part is understandable to me. The other part, I begin to lose, and it's not losing, but I'm not confident in how I feel about it yet, is that we're talking about a being that is infinite, in a relationship with us who are both eternal and finite.
Mm-hmm.
Finite being us in the flesh here, but we're certainly eternal, good or evil, wherever we may be. And I don't have a firm understanding yet of what that really means, but there's I don't know that I can embrace the emotional part of God without it being a communicative sense. That you gave us a word for it at one time,
Promorphism,
Yeah.
anthropopathism.
something that wasn't that a word describing the human traits to God? And I'm kind of in there, and I honestly, I don't really know exactly what, I can't say that with definitive, this is what I really believe. It's big.
Yeah, it is.
I mean, it's like eternity. I can tell you I know, yes, eternity. I understand the concept.
Right.
But the reality of never being any closer at the end, there is no end, that, you know, it's just like the song, 10,000 years and we're still, you know, I mean, that, I don't know.
Yeah, that particularly when I try to think about eternity, especially God having no beginning, I give others like 10 seconds of, okay, I'm done thinking about that. Fries my
The
mind.
creator of that, we're trying to understand.
Right. Now, see, here's the thing. Let's be real. I don't think, at least on earth, anyone will ever come to the point where they say, I have a full understanding of God and are telling the truth. This is not God. He's way too deep.
Yeah.
Now, I have no idea what our existences are going to look like once we're dead. Maybe a little bit of an idea, but at the very least, the Bible does not give us a definitive picture. I believe that is very purposefully not given to us.
I do too.
However, it's what you said. It's a difference between a concept and a full understanding. I believe what we're given in the Bible, and this is my opinion, you'll find people who disagree with me. It's fine. You can disagree with me. It's fine. At the very least, I want you to have good reasons for it. I believe the Bible gives us the conceptual structure of an understanding of God. But we're not going to get anywhere near the fullness of that. Because it's one thing to say God is good. We can understand that, right? I mean, that's an understanding. We get it. But man, we don't get it.
No. No.
We don't really get it.
No.
We can understand it based on our concept of understanding of that. But we don't really get it. We've never met a human being that comes anywhere near the depth of goodness that is our God.
No.
And so I have the same belief concerning things like emotion, concerning things like omniscience and omnipotence, and so on and so forth. I think we're giving the concept and the foundational structure for an understanding, but we're not going to come anywhere near the full depth of understanding. For what it means for God to grieve something, we can recognize human grief. We've seen that, but I don't think it comes anywhere near the kind of grief that our Father felt in relation to seeing his children turn from him completely, murdering and raping and desecrating each other. So that's my concept. And once again, please disagree with me. You'll notice I'm taking the gloves off a little bit more in terms of my own opinion of things today. We're recapping. But once again, and this is one of the basic things I talked about when I started this class, and whenever new people come in, I always tell them this. Please feel free to disagree with me. If you walk out of here saying, I believe everything Nate said, that is a warning sign. However, if you walk out of here saying, I refuse to believe anything Nate said, that is just as big a warning sign.
Yes.
We need to be critically and lovingly examining the things that we're studying here and working them out within ourselves with fear and trembling.
Yes.
But we need to be working them out. We can't sit on our presuppositional haunches, if that makes sense. Because that's what is so common everywhere. We have an idea, and we never examine it. And then we get really angry when someone else is examining it. How dare you examine the presuppositions I've held for so long?
Yes.
That's blatantly advocated throughout Scripture.
It's really refreshing that we're doing this because these are things that, I don't know, I have not really ever thought about very much. I mean, a lot of the stuff, some of it, yes, but just even this whole idea about time. I mean, we go to a certain level and that's where we stop with it. And just even digging a little further, it's kind of cool about that.
Yeah, I think so too. And that was a major reason why I felt like God called me to put this thing together, because there simply isn't a place for this kind of discussion on a Sunday morning.
Yes.
It just isn't. But I do think it's valuable. Whether you walk out of here believing more strongly the things you believed when you came in the room or questioning them, whatever it is, it needs to be healthy growth.
Yes.
Not confusion for the sake of confusion, not shaking things up for shaking things up's sake. And also not holding on to our pre-decided beliefs for their sake either. But honestly and lovingly moving closer to an understanding of our God. And when I say an understanding, what I mean is deeper in our understanding. Because we're called to grow in grace and knowledge. But I don't think we're going to get there anytime soon in terms of a fullness. I know that years of studying the Bible, and I just know another drop in the bucket that is God. Whether or not there is even an end to the bucket, I don't know. I certainly can't conceive of there not being one, but what am I? You know. All I know is, if I am not learning more about God year over year, then I'm doing something wrong.
Yes.
And I think that's true of all of us.
Yes.
Whether on a relational level or a theological level, because they're both, in the end, referring to the same thing.
Yes.
So we've gotten off on a trail about why we study now. And that's okay. Because it's good to talk about. But that is the basics of time. Okay? Now, once again, you're going to have people who say God is outside of time, and what the Bible says about this and that of emotion, it actually has no bearing on what he really is like. It's just given, and that's a difficulty, because there has to be a reason it's given in the Bible. And either the reason is this is actually something that God experiences on a much deeper level than we can ever imagine, or it actually does not have a bearing on what he really experiences, and it's just beyond our understanding. It's one or the other. But once again, my preference is always going to be God doesn't obscure things for the sake of obscuring them. It is to the glory of God to hide a matter. It is to the glory of kings to seek out that matter.
Yes.
It's Psalms,
Right.
one of my favorite verses.
Yeah, right.
So, any more questions about time before we move on? I know it's seriously brushing the surface, but at least it gives us a conceptual idea to be thinking about on our own terms. Okay, any other, it's funny, we've already used up half the class time. Any other clarifications needed or questions about the last 6 weeks before we start talking about sin? And it's not like speak now or forever hold your peace. We have the Facebook page and even future classes. I'm not against going back and talking about stuff before, because all of this is building a foundation and it all connects. It's all so connected. None of it is just like, okay, now here's a totally separate subject. We're all talking about God and the Christian life and really about reality as it really is.
Did we discuss Calvinist, what a Calvinist is?
Yeah.
We did, and I can give a quick
I missed
reminder.
Okay,
Sure.
quick.
There's a distinguishment that needs to be made between hyper-Calvinism. It's funny. Asia had her hand up again. I looked back and she goes, no.
I'll raise this
Not
hand
a
if I have a question, okay?
There's a distinguishment that needs to be made between hyper-Calvinism and Calvinism. Hyper-Calvinism you can also call fatalism, because it holds that everything that has ever happened or will ever happen, God predestined and controls.
Mm-hmm.
Every human action, there is no free will whatsoever. None. Zero. Nada. God controls everything. Meticulous control is the term. That is hyper-Calvinism, also known as fatalism.
Mm-hmm.
Then you'll find Calvinism, the moderated version, or what I called Reformed theology when we were going over these views. And that one is a little more nuanced, and I'll try to be quick, but bottom line, it holds that man had free will, and man freely chose the fall.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result of the fall, and now we're getting into sin nature discussion, which we're moving into soon. But as a result of the fall, every human being is depraved. Depraved means they cannot do anything but ultimately sin. They can do no good. They can do good by accident or along the route, but ultimately speaking, in broad terms, they cannot come to God, they cannot choose God, they cannot choose moral rightness. Every human being, every single one of us. Calvinism also believes that God sovereignly chooses some people to be regenerated and to be saved. Regenerated means that sin nature gets dissolved for some people, and they have the freedom to choose good again. And God chooses those people to come to relationship with Him, and it's irresistible grace. Once He chooses them, they can never say no, and they're saved and they're going to heaven. And the people He does not choose continue to be totally depraved, and they will go to hell. And God has no reason for, well, that's how it is. God has no reason. There's no reason whatsoever for God choosing one or the other. There's no merit, nothing that we've done. He just chooses based on His sovereign choice, His free choice, some over others. If Calvinism is true, some of us in this room might be what you call the elect. God has chosen us. We are in relationship with him, we're going to heaven. Some of us in this room might not be. And it doesn't matter what happens from here on to the end of whatever, we're going to hell because God did not choose us. So to that end, there's this term called limited atonement, which means Jesus Christ died for the elect and not for everyone else. And that is about the quickest version of what Calvinism is that I can give. Yes?
Actually, right before I came here, I read 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, and so there were actually two completely flip sides of that viewpoint that I ran across. Was that there was one point at which he explicitly said, God died for not only our sins, but everybody's sins.
Yep.
Straight up, that's in
The
there.
sins of the whole world. So.
Yeah, it's a sentence in there, it's there. But it, like, there's a couple of other places in those books where he says, you know, those who have been called to God cannot sin. You know, those who truly know God, who have been chosen by God, will not go back to their sinful life. And on the one hand, it's like, what does that mean? Because maybe I don't get it because I'm not one of these elect, but I screw up all the darn time. I think everybody does, maybe I'm wrong. Every human, no matter how much progress they make and how hard they try, they're not going to get it right 100% of the time. So what does that actually mean?
Which verse? Both of them?
Well, no, the those who truly know God will not go back to their evil ways kind of thing.
I'd have to look at the verse in translation, or look at the NASB translation specifically. Off the top of my head, 1 John, and that's 1 John is the big one where he really goes into
Yeah.
sin and not sin, so on and so forth. Really incredible book.
Yes.
With also some of the, for me, some of the most famously difficult to interpret scriptures in the Bible. John places a huge emphasis on the concept of freedom from sin in Christianity. And he colors it in terms of lightness and darkness. He says if you are with God, you are in the light and you are not in the darkness. And he says nobody who loves God is continuously sinning. And this goes into Greek translation here because he uses the present tense. It's present, active, indicative tense, the Greek word, which means, so if I say, does not sin, if it's in present tense is not sinning presently
Yeah.
and like happening. Well, that's perfect tense. Careful. But present tense means is not sinning currently. So Jesus says, behold, I stand at the door and knock. Present tense, continuously knocking. Right now, this is what I'm doing. I'm knocking. So John has this really big emphasis on the idea that Christians do not sin. And when I say do not sin, I don't mean sin once, because he doesn't use, there's the aorist tense, which is like one point in reality. You do not sin, which would mean possibly ever, or in any one instance or whatever. Christians are not sinning. Make sense? So the difference between a Christian never sins and a Christians are not sinning would be, I guess, the consistency with which I would say. So what is clear is Jesus lays down and Paul lays down ways by which Christians receive forgiveness, which implicitly tells us that they're recognizing that Christians goof up. If there's a means by which we can receive forgiveness after we've been saved, then we goof up. And I think all of us have experienced that, right? Has any of us never sinned again since we became Christians? That's ridiculous, right? It's silly. However, is sinning is a different picture.
Yes.
If I am sinning, then I'm in the act of sinning, and I'm continuing to sin, and I'm just walking along down the path of sin, and this is whistling, but I'm also a Christian. The difference is, I'm walking, and I goof up, but I come back. I goofed up again, but I came back. I asked for forgiveness, and I fixed things, and but here's where I'm walking. I'm walking in the light. and not in the darkness down here.
Right.
Christianity is not, I'm a Christian and now I'm down here. I'm just standing here and I go up and, well, okay, I'm mostly down here. Oh, maybe like a good moment, but I'm down here. This is sinning. This is sins once, twice, occasionally, the occasional goof up.
So basically what I'm getting out of this is that you have your mess ups, you get pulled into the darkness because that's what we might call human nature, and I'm sure we're going to get into that on this topic. But
Yes, we are.
we get pulled into the darkness, but we strive towards the light, and we say, "Oh gosh, I don't want to do that. Please help me not do that."
Yeah, and what I've just given you is the overall thrust of John's point in the book of 1 John, because he repeats that point over and over again. He also emphasizes love in contrast to sin. But that would be the big one in which John says, look, Christians aren't continuously sinning. If you're continuously sinning, and that's some really dangerous words
Oh, yeah.
you just said, because that implies a condition for your Christianity. Wait a minute, is it unconditional? Unconditional election, right? Works or faith? Which is it? This is why the Reformation happened. Because the Catholic Church was all about the works. If you do this, you are a Christian, you're saved. Martin Luther came along. Ulrich Zwingli and John Calvin, the great reformers, came along and said, no, not works, faith. And faith alone, sola fide. Faith alone, no works whatsoever. Now there's that pesky book of James that Martin Luther wanted removed from the canon.
Really?
Not joking.
I didn't know that.
He wanted it removed. He said he hated it. It is not scripture, said Martin Luther. Martin Luther was wrong, in my opinion. But he hated it for a lot of reasons. But the big reason he hated it was because there's that one little statement in James in which it says, faith without works is dead. So over here you have works alone, and over here you have faith alone, and then James says, okay, well, what about right there? Faith that is acted out in reality through the acting out of it in reality. Otherwise, what good is your faith? C.S. Lewis put it like this. He said, what good is faith in Christ if you don't listen to the explicit words of Christ?
Exactly.
What kind of faith is that? It's not faith. Jesus Christ is my Savior, but I don't really like to do the things He told me to do. What? Anyways, how did we get here? Right. First John. And so now we're jumping ahead. We're jumping ahead to whole new subjects here, and we're going to get here in the discussion of sin and sin nature, and then we get to go into what a Christian is and the Christian life and how one becomes a Christian and how one continues to be a Christian and what it looks like in relationship with God. And these are all places we're going to because it's so important. And this is why it's hard. You jump into question answering like this and you start crossing lines into all these other areas that are so connected because it's all so connected. Yeah, I hope that helps. There's no way for me to exposit the verse without sitting here and expositing the verse. But at least I can give you, that is very clearly John's point throughout 1 John. He makes the point over and over and over again. In relationship with God, continuous sinning doesn't happen. Anywho. At this point, we've only answered 2-ish questions. And we have 18 minutes left. So are you guys okay with us starting our discussion of sin?
Yeah.
Yeah? Now once again, this is not a speak now or forever hold your peace. I love discussion and answering questions and talking about stuff like this. This is fun and dynamic for me. And I think it's honestly really beneficial to be able to just freely ask questions and go into them and have time for this. So once again, whether it's in a future class or whether it's one-on-one or send me a Facebook message or put it on the Foundation's forum for future discussion, whatever it is, please ask questions. Rather than, because people, this is how we work in America. We don't like to put ourselves out there.
Yeah.
We don't like to admit that we have questions. We're afraid of, wow, what if this is basic and easy, and everyone goes, wow, you don't understand that, or whatever. We don't like to raise our hand and put it out there we don't understand something. But that's silly. That's fear of man is what it is. Fear of God is something that freely and openly admits we don't understand jack about him. And that we'd really like to have help in getting a little bit deeper. So, yeah, please ask questions. Fun stuff. So let's, and once again, we're going to get a drop in the bucket here. We're going to start moving into a discussion of sin. This is a big one. It's a big one, right? When you talk about Christianity, you have to talk about sin.
Yes.
At least to some degree, right? Because, while Christianity certainly does not focus on sin per se, it certainly focuses on freedom from sin and avoiding sin and overcoming sin and forgiveness of sin. That is all implicit in the gospel, implicit throughout the Bible. Now, once again, we're talking about sin. The unfortunate reality is that these days, it's not a very fashionable subject.
No.
In many circles in modern Christianity, it's almost a taboo thing to talk about in church. Really, especially like a sermon. You don't talk about sin. Now, why is that, do you think?
Because it's tough. I mean, a lot of people are doing what they want to do, and I think that some churches are afraid to approach that because the people won't come if they're not hearing the message. That yeah, exactly.
People do not like to be told what to do.
No.
More specifically, people do not like being told that their lifestyles are wrong.
Exactly.
Often, it's the difference between coming back and not coming back. I'm not going to come back and be told that I have to change something about me.
Yeah.
It's the idea that says, well, this is my lifestyle. How dare you tell me it's wrong?
Yes. Yeah.
How dare you point your finger at my actions,
Yeah.
my system of living, and tell me that it's wrong. It's what's right for me is right for me, and don't you dare say otherwise. Now, in the past 75 years or so, there has been a massive rise in that general worldview. The term is, philosophically speaking, the term is postmodernism. Go ahead and write it here. Postmodernism. Now, let's have a really quick history lesson. Way back in the 1650s, from 1650-ish to 1780-ish, we had a philosophical movement known as the Enlightenment. You heard of that? The Enlightenment, right around the time of the Renaissance. And the Enlightenment was a movement, philosophical movement, that represented the rise of reason. Reason came into the limelight. And any and all traditions and institutions were challenged. Specifically, things like the church. The oppressive church that holds the secret truth. We don't need you anymore. We have science.
Yes.
We have reason now. We can discover the truth of reality on our own. We don't need to be told. That's the Enlightenment. There's a big change in the philosophical tendencies of the developed world, the Western world. Now, the Enlightenment gave way to something called modernism. Modernism, which would be the late 19th century to the early 20th century or so. Now, in modernism, and this is actually much more difficult to define than the Enlightenment, but with modernism in general, it was a philosophical movement in which they rejected the individual's ability to come to an understanding of the truth. Rather, they put their faith in government, and government-run science and government-run technology. And this is the modern world. We have technology and the advancements that the government gives us and the meta-narratives that the government lays out for us, the history and the art and everything in between. This is what is true. This is modern man, civilized man. And so again, they rejected the individual's ability to come to knowledge of the truth and rather said it's in the infrastructure that can figure out the way reality works. And they will give us the master story, the meta-narrative is the term. And so modernism then gave way, coming up on 100 years ago, to postmodernism. Postmodernism took it a step further than modernism, and they rejected any meta-narrative. In other words, any kind of overarching truth about reality, they rejected. Instead, saying, well, there's no one truth. There is no one truth. Instead, there are many truths that are relative. Relative means, well, for me, I have this truth, and this is what's true for me. And for you, well, you have that truth, and that's what's true for you. And even if they contradict, that's fine. Doesn't matter. No meta-narrative. No one grand truth that overrides all individual truths. They're just individual truths, and that's it. Complete subjectivity is the term. So this is what has been more or less dominating this culture, at least, for the last close to a century, close to 100 years. And to be real, you won't find a lot of people who would say, I am a postmodern. Because it's gotten way, way beyond that point. It's no longer a popular movement in which people can identify with it or not. It's gotten to the point that it is an underwriting belief that is throughout our culture. If people don't say, well, I'm a postmodern, people would feel strongly that they are entitled to their own way of living.
Yes.
And feel angry whenever you say you shouldn't live like that.
Yes.
Now, this isn't doomsday talk. Most reasonable people you talk to will generally agree that there are some things that are just wrong. However, the concept that there are very clear standards has been eroded pretty severely. And so, when you talk about things like murder, most people would say, well, murder's probably not a good thing. Most of them have no basis from which to say that it is truly wrong or why it's wrong. I just kind of feel that way because I think conscience is still a thing for most people. But at the same time, they feel very strongly, well, what's right for me is right for me, and my lifestyle is fine for me, and how dare you try to force someone to live according to your standards? Which is obviously serious issues there, because the concept of law itself is trying to force us to live by standards.
Yes.
People say, don't legalize your religion, don't get your religion into law. Somebody's religion or somebody's worldview is going to be law.
Yes.
That's how it is. Once again, people get really irritated when you say, don't tell me how to live. Don't tell me that this is wrong or that's wrong. Just let me live the way I want to live. So they have a relative view of morality, both on a moral and pragmatic level. What is right for me is right for me. And really, even a lot of Christians, churchgoers, feel this way, which is why the most popular churches are the ones that are affirmation only.
Yes.
And here's the thing. There are people who they sit on Facebook and do nothing but call out the affirmation only churches as the devil and the heretic and this is the Antichrist and look at the affirmation only. Yes, there is such a thing as overemphasis on affirmation, clearly. However, Jesus Christ, the main thrust of his message was a life that functioned better than the life we have in front of us. He called it the abundant life. Life and life abundantly. That is a good message.
Yes.
That's good news. That's what the gospel means. Good news. It is a good news message. Now, entwined within that message is a message that, okay, look, you can't do these things or you can't experience the good life by definition. Now, why that is, we get to go into. But again, the most popular churches are affirmation only, and it's not that affirmation is wrong, but affirmation without the call to responsibility
Yes.
is at least 50% hollow.
Yes. Yes.
It's only 50% of the message.
Yes.
So once again, we are not called to be hellfire brimstone, because that's only one side of the message.
Yes.
Don't sin because this and this. At the same time, we're not called to affirmation only. Jesus Christ presented both.
Yes.
Very clearly, he presented both. So did Paul. So did Peter. So did John. It really makes you wonder where people can get off saying, I do this one or I do this one. I don't like to mix them or whatever. I like only this side or only this side, when the people who are very literally supposed to be our models in preaching and evangelism and in relationship with God had a very clear balance, because it's two pillars of the same structure.
Yes.
So many Christians feel this way at some level or another, that they are entitled to their own way of living and that you should not call me out on my way of living. Only God can judge me. Blah, blah, blah. Now, the question, the postmodern ideals, do they work in Christianity? Can they jive? Can they fit in?
I think we should, in as much as I feel like postmodernism encourages being, kind of tempering your judgment towards another person, maybe, but in as much as striving towards your own abundant life, no.
Yeah, see, that's the difference. It's true, we're all individuals. My relationship with God is probably going to look different from yours. The ways that I feed myself spiritually on a weekly basis are almost definitely going to look different from yours. However, it's objectively true that we all need to have a relationship with God, and that we all need to be feeding ourselves on a weekly basis, daily basis. It's true objectively that we shouldn't be murdering or thieving or committing adultery or whatever. These are objective truths, and often how we live those things out are going to look a little bit different. But the objective standard of reality is still there.
Yeah.
And this denies it. Completely denies it. So I said, can these things fit in with Christianity? I saw some head shakes, no. I mean, the problem is postmodernism has its basis in relativity. And one of the main thrusts of that is moral relativity. So, well, if my good is murdering anyone I feel like murdering, well, that's what's good for me. Now I've taken the extreme. But there's no logical conflict with that worldview for me saying, well, that's what's good for me. And maybe for you, maybe for you what's good is not murdering, but you're not me. So you can't tell me what I'm doing is wrong, because it's me. This is my life, my truth. So Christianity can't function like that, because we can't have any talk of moral relativity in Christianity. Now, why?
Because our standards are God's standards.
Because we have a standard at all.
That's right.
And not just a generalized standard, we have a very clear standard.
Yes.
Because we have a Bible.
Yes.
We have a Bible that it spells out to us, this is right and this is wrong. There's no two ways about it.
So structure
We have
comes
structure.
to mind. I mean, you have to have,
Yeah.
not you have to, but structure.
Yeah, God says,
Wow.
thou shalt not commit adultery. And that is a law that covers all human beings. Now, this is what you call a meta-narrative.
Mm-hmm.
And postmodernism denies anything that applies to all human beings. Anything.
No standard.
Yeah, any standard. which in itself, that rule is a standard that applies to all human beings.
Yeah, it does make sense.
But yeah, we have clear moral standards, very clear. God told us, here's what's right, here's what's wrong. And so moral relativity has no place
Yes.
in Christianity, in the Christian life. And so finally, before we finish out here, let's get to the basic idea. How does sin fit in the idea of an objective system of moral rightness and wrongness? That's what we have in Christianity. An objective system of moral rightness and moral wrongness. How does sin fit in our moral system?
There are things that if you do them, you're going to hurt yourself and other people.
Yeah, see, that's the thing. It's really easy for us to jump ahead, and that is jumping ahead.
Sorry.
You understand too much to silence you.
Well, actually, I had a conversation with your dad earlier this week where he said that.
Uh-oh.
I'm cheating. I
No,
have
it's all good.
lifelong
Because see, this is
talks
stuff that I talk about sin in my Sunday morning sermons. Whoops. I do.
Oh, that's good.
Yes, I think so too. So some of this is stuff you'll have heard before. You'll have heard me or someone else, I'm sure, say this stuff before. But sin, at the very least, when we're talking about a system of moral standards, sin, and this is what you said, it represents moral wrongness.
Yes. Yeah.
Now, that is nowhere near a full definition of sin.
Right.
Nowhere close. But it is foundational that we at least see that much
Yes.
in moving forward.
Yeah.
So in talking about a moral standard, sin represents the moral wrongness side of the standard of morality that we have. Make sense?
Yeah.
And it's like, oh duh. But this is stuff that you'd be surprised at how many people would either disagree with or have never thought about.
They have no
Or
idea.
have arguments.
Or have arguments about it, whatever. Sin,
Arguments.
it's funny, but mostly frustrating to see how many different views of sin there are. What is sin? People make it out to be the gremlin that's out to get you. It's coming to get you. Better look out.
I teach a little class for little kids, and this week just so happens I'm teaching them about sin. So, and we're still in Numbers, but so the question is, what is sin? And this is what I'm going to teach these little kids on Wednesday. Doing what God says is wrong. That's what sin is on a 2-year-old, 3-year-old level.
Yeah.
And really, a lot of adults really don't get that either. You know, they really don't.
Yeah, and you know what? That's true. Now, however, there's once again even that definition is very surface level,
Yes.
and we get to go deeper.
That's the 3-year-old version.
Exactly, but again,
Can't give them more than what they
even that is something that
Yeah.
isn't readily
Yeah.
agreed upon
Yeah.
Right.
by the majority of Christians. But we get to go deeper. And I think the deeper we get to understand what sin is, because there is deeper to go. Clearly there is deeper to go than simply saying sin is moral wrongness or sin is what God says is wrong. Because God has motives and reasons.
Yeah.
And we get to actually say, well, what are his motives and reasons? It's really cool. So again, that is the basics of the basics of what, well, at least a structure for being able to move forward and discussing what sin is. And we didn't get as far as I wanted to, but we almost did. So next week we get to, in earnest, begin to define what sin is. Begin to look at God's motives, why God wants us to do some things and doesn't want us to do others, and so on and so forth. Any questions before we end tonight?
It just as a thought for even within the 10 Commandments, it says, "Thou shalt not murder." I've had this discussion. In the Christian, when you read it in the New Testament, it goes, "Thou shalt not kill." Two really different, because in the Hebrew, which probably maybe came from Greek or what other thing, murder was, "Thou shalt not murder," but it was not okay, but you were you had to defend yourself. There's a difference between thou shalt not murder and thou shalt not kill.
Yeah, but I'll tell you I'll tell you this. Every single time that Jesus repeats that,
Yeah.
even when it's translated as kill as opposed to murder,
Uh-huh.
the Greek word, there are two very clear words between murder and kill, and he uses the one that implies murder, as in not just a self-defense or not in terms of war or whatever else. He's specifically using a Greek word that implies the idea of unlawful, completely unjustified
Right.
murder.
So
It's the same thing in Hebrew. Not the same word, but the same
Right.
concept from the Hebrew language.
Right. But there is a difference in defending yourself and out and out killing somebody just because you are, you know,
Well, there is certainly a difference on a practical level.
yeah.
But in terms of Jesus' language,
Yeah,
and there are people who would make who have made the distinction to me. Well, in the Old Testament it says murder, and the New
Yeah.
Testament says kill, which is
Yeah.
why I'm a pacifist.
yeah,
No violence whatsoever. But at the very least, that argument is not justified based on the Hebrew and Greek language.
okay,
The translations say kill, but the Greek word means murder.
murder. Very interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, you could really, you can't, just so,
Now, there are definitely other arguments to be made for pacifism. There are people who I highly respected theologians, who are pacifists because of the way they interpret certain things. I am not a pacifist because of the way I interpret other things. But there's stuff you have to look at. An eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, but I tell you,
Yes.
it's a sermon on the mount.
Yes.
So, yeah, any other questions before we are done?
very interesting.
Come later.
Yeah.
Yeah, as you come up with
As we
questions
drive
We
midweek,
sit there and start looking at it. and looking
Yeah.
at it.
as you come up with questions midweek, feel free to put them on the Foundation's Facebook page, and we can discuss them. I will respond as I can. But other than that, thanks, guys.
Yeah. Thank you.